Amazing. But we have a pretty amazing group here today. We're going to talk about the G7, the past, the present, and hopefully the future, a good future after 50 years of this amazing process. I would like to introduce our panelists. First of all, on my left is Senator Peter Boehm. After a challenging role as Sherpa for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who hosted the 2018 summit at Charlevoix, with President Trump in attendance, I think Senator Boehm was awarded an appointment to the Senate the same year. Senator Boehm has been Canada's Sherpa for a total of 6 G7 summits. So a very lengthy perspective that hopefully he will share with us. He served in international affairs throughout his career, both in Canada as the Deputy Minister of International Development and Senior Associate Deputy of Foreign Affairs, and internationally as the Ambassador to Germany and to the Association of American States, among other foreign postings. Welcome, Peter. Dr. John Kirton is a professor emeritus in political science at the University of Toronto and the founder and director of the G7 Research Group based there. He has attended every summit since 1988, when the summit was held in Toronto and apparently partly on the University of Toronto campus. He's the co-editor with Madeleine Koch of the book, here we go, The G7 Canada, the 2025 Kananaskis Summit, background book. Copies are available, thanks to John and Madeleine, here at the conference, and for those of you that are attending virtually, you can go to g7.utoronto.ca. Thank you, John, for all the work you do in the G7 Research Group. I could tell a little joke about Chris, I don't know, but apparently he hails from Detroit. And I kind of had assumed he was a Canadian, but he's an honorary Canadian. And so I came up with this idea that so he lived so close to the border that maybe he had border envy. Anyway, he really likes Canada and has been involved in research on Canada-U.S. relations in the context of the North American political economy for many years. He actually wrote the last article in this magazine, so I hope you read it with care, talking about the possible future and the role of the United States in the summitry process. He's the director of the Center, ER, not RE, for Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies in Washington. Chris will talk about the future of the G7 and the path forward. Thank you. Welcome, Chris. While I'm here, we might as well start. I think we'll start with Senator Boehm. Given his huge experience through so many summits, I mean, a perspective, have things changed? I mean, the very strong personalities, the amazing process to get to consensus, I'm overwhelmed. So I hope Peter will share some of that experience and any additional thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. It's great to be in Calgary. I'm sorry Monsieur Chrétien has left, because I was going to say that I was the unnamed official in the picture of him at the G7 summit in Naples, his first one as Prime Minister in 1994 when I was a junior officer and I was running some documents to him. The following year at Halifax, I was also the unnamed official in the photograph. It gives me a sort of Zelig quality in that I've been the unnamed official at so many different events. I'm also originally from the public service and a bureaucrat who has somehow made the transition to becoming a politician. So I could say that as well. Look, I wanted to maybe just talk a little bit in the time that I have about how the organism of the G7 has changed over the past 50 years, since Kananaskis will be the 50th, And then I want to end with a few of the greatest hits from a Canadian perspective, and I mean that more or less in pugilistic terms, but more in terms of songs that we could sing. This is going to be a consequential summit, without a doubt. Its organization has been difficult for almost purely domestic reasons from an organizational perspective. We had a prime minister who assumed the presidency at the beginning of January of the G7 and then resigned. We had another prime minister who came in as a result of a leadership race. Then we had an election. So, and during that election period, there was something called the Caretaker Convention, because at that time you can't really do too much or take too many decisions as public servants. So a lot of work went on, and this is what the G7 has become over time, is an organism where you see only the peak, if you want to use the iceberg analogy, but there's a lot going on below the surface in terms of working groups and other things. So a compressed period of time for Prime Minister Carney and his team to organize. But feeding in to the summit were two very important meetings. One was the meeting of foreign ministers at Charlevoix, Quebec, that Mélanie Joly chaired in her last cabinet incarnation. And then the meeting of finance ministers at Banff a few weeks ago, where François-Philippe Champagne was gathered with his colleagues and with the central bank governors and with the heads of the international institutions that run the economic system in the world. So compressed time. On the other hand, that kind of speeds up the negotiation pace. What we can expect out of Kananaskis is not an agreed communique. We did have one at Charlevoix, and I'll get into that in just a moment, but probably a chair summary with individual statements on the key items that the Prime Minister has declared as priorities. So artificial intelligence, obviously Ukraine with President Zelensky there, critical minerals, state of the global economy, and there will be a plethora of bilateral meetings. It's sometimes called the diplomatic speed dating, whether they're sit-down meetings or just brush-bys, pull-asides. There are all of these different terms of art for that, because people, leaders, and there's some new ones coming, will want to meet Donald Trump bilaterally, and he doesn't particularly like the big round table as much as he likes the one-on-one. They'll want to meet our Prime Minister as the host, and they'll want to meet each other. And that includes those who will be there for the outreach day, the other additional leaders who've been invited for the last day of the summit. So what has happened over 50 years is, I remember when I started as a director at this '94 summit in Naples, our communications I was working for the Sherpa, so all communications were done by fax. And they were unclassified. And these days, faxes, I think it's only doctors who use fax machines across the country. But that was the way to communicate. Now we have all kinds of secure means, and leaders and ministers can have secure video calls, and we in fact did have those back in Charlevoix as well. There's been a plethora as well of ministerial meetings. Last year, during the Italian presidency, there were 22 ministerial meetings. Now imagine if we were to do that in Canada, the first question would always be, how much is this costing? What is the value to the Canadian taxpayer? So I would expect that after Kananaskis, there might be a few more ministerial meetings as well to take what the leaders had achieved forwards. Flashback to Charlevoix, it's a myth that President Trump ordered the removal of his signature from the communique because there weren't any signatures on the communique. And the work continued, and what he did afterwards as he was leaving, and he left early, was to send a tweet that, as John Manley said, disparaged our Prime Minister. But the work continued, and so it should, and that was the message, I think, from Prime Minister Chrétien: keep calm and carry on. For me, I was listening with interest to Prime Minister Chrétien talking about Boris Yeltsin inviting Russia to be part of it at Halifax, because I had gone to Moscow to prepare the road for that. And it worked, and yet ironically, many years later, in 2014, I was the Sherpa for Prime Minister Harper, and we were working out the formula to kick the Russians out of the G8. So in a sense, it's full circle. We've had some successes as Canada. At Charleroi, the first ever discussion amongst world leaders on the problem of ocean plastics. It was on the last day, and many leaders of small island states came, and some bigger ones as well. We've had the Maternal Newborn Child Health Initiative out of Muskoka, the G8 that Stephen Harper chaired in 2010. That work is continuing. And in many of the late night and all night sessions that I've been in with Sherpas, as we're trying to reach consensus, there's often come a time, usually at 3 in the morning or something, where someone will look at me or whoever's in the Canadian chair and say, okay, it's time. And we'd say, well, it's time for what? It's time for the Great Canadian Initiative to compromise and get this thing done. So we do add value depending on the price of oil. We're either the 8th or 9th largest economy in the world. We do belong at the table, and I think for us, this is an important facet of our foreign policy. It is in a way the jewel in the crown. It's less so for the U.S., and Chris will talk about that, I think. But for us, it's also a very important counterweight to our overwhelming bilateral relationship with our southern neighbor. And for that, it is valuable. Leaders like the G7, they come to it with a bit of trepidation at the beginning. They're listening the first time, but then they engage. And what makes it work is that informality that Jean Chrétien mentioned. And I think Kananaskis will be no exception. There will be new leaders there. It will be chaired by our leader, who has a lot of experience, never sitting there as the head of government, but having sat there as the chief advisor in ministerial meetings or a participant for 2 different member countries of the G7. So maybe I'll stop right there. Thanks.
Let me pick up where Peter left off. This year's Kananaskis Summit, what are its priorities? What are the prospects for its success? And what are the key propellers that are going to drive that performance? There are 10 priorities. 7 are brought to the mountaintop by our own Prime Minister as host, Mark Carney. The other 3 have been thrust upon it by President Donald Trump of the United States. The prospects are that it will produce a significant performance. So I'm with Prime Minister Chrétien on that one. And the propellers, there are many, but at the end it's because all leaders look to the G7 as the club at the hub of global governance. And they all want to be there and make it work, because there's nowhere else to go. First, the 10 priorities. Number 1, security, led by, of course, winning the war in Ukraine against Russia's aggression. And that will take an effort to provide, with President Zelensky there, more support for Ukraine, more sanctions against Russia than before, and I expect that that will be done. The second priority in the security bucket, countering foreign interference and transnational repression to protect citizens' rights and their state's sovereignty. The emphasis will be on foreign interference in diaspora communities. One thinks here in Canada about Canadians of Indian origin, Chinese origin to start, foreign interference against human rights activists and journalists too. Number 3, brand new, the burning issue of our time across most Canadian provinces in the United States and across the Atlantic. It's wildfires. Improving joint responses to wildfires through multilateral efforts to predict, prevent, fight, and recover from them. It begins with prosaic things like equipment interoperability. So when the firefighters from Australia arrive, as they're doing now, we need to make sure that their hoses will connect with our water pumps here and with those that our American friends are already bringing here. No more Jaspers, I guess, is one way of putting a benchmark on it. Also sharing satellite imagery, where Canada is one of the leaders in the world with Earth remote technology. RadarSat has been the poster child for us here, and helping developing countries access, interpret that imagery, because it's not just our wildfires burning when we're beyond our winter, but it's then that the Amazon in Brazil is going up in flames, and Australia too. So we're all in this together. And I think on the outreach day, the wildfires agenda will not die at the summit on day 1, but it'll go into day 2. The next one, energy security, of course, with fortifying the critical minerals supply chains at the core to produce clean energy for the G7 and beyond. Probably starting by setting standards, labor, environment, and transparency standards for where the critical minerals come from. By the Democratic Republic of Congo and cobalt come to mind. Mobilizing our international organizations, the OECD, the International Energy Agency, to help improving and diversifying the technology for their extraction and processing, lest we forget, and helping developing countries to rise up the value chain as well. The 5th, accelerating the digital transition to unleash economic growth by fostering artificial intelligence across the public sector, fewer bureaucrats, more productive to do more, and private sector as well. Not just for the big businesses, but for small and medium-sized enterprise too. And yes, helping prevent a new digital divide between the North and South by giving the Global South the advantages of AI, just like us. And of course, the new AI, because as Peter can tell us, the global governance of AI was born at the Charlevoix Summit in 2018. But here at Kananaskis, it's the new AI, it's quantum technology. So let's see if the leaders will be as knowledgeable in their treatment of it as many of you are in the room here. Then partnerships of the future for infrastructure, specifically private capital mobilization. And we've heard that from Prime Minister Carney at home on the campaign trail. $1 of our taxpayers' money will unleash 10 times as much from the private sector if we get the rules, the platforms, the principles right. While also looking at the multilateral development banks to lend a hand. A 7th, coalition with reliable partners and the outreach guests are the biggest, most powerful democratic countries from both the global north and the global south, including Ramaphosa of South Africa, who's hosting the G20. And Canada has working from the beginning in common cause to make this G7 work for his G20 and to expand the influence of the G7 at Kananaskis throughout the bigger or broader world. Then the three that have been thrust upon us by Donald Trump: trade and tariffs. No more do I need to say now on that. The next one, migration, in a word, which has been thrust upon us, yes, by Donald Trump, as you well know, but we must always remember that Georgia Maloney, of course, featured it at her summit last year, so it's not just from North America. And then finally, one I'm keeping my eye on, deficit spending. John Manley has said we actually got to balanced budgets, but not a single G7 country seems to even be trying to do that ever. And with the downgrade in the credit rating of the United States for the first time in over a century a few weeks ago, and Donald Trump's big, beautiful, non-balanced budget stuck in the Senate. Chris will tell us how that will track, all right? Markets are getting jumpy, and the last thing we need is another global financial crisis that we did not detect and prevent at this G7 summit in time. Why do I think it will produce a significant performance? And I think here we start with the areas on which all leaders can agree, beginning with Donald Trump. And there's a long list, and Chris can correct me. They can all agree that we need more fiscal stimulus now to fuel stronger growth, and that fiscal stimulus will include more defense spending. I mean, we're all doing it anyways. Let's do it in a common and indeed more coordinated way. Second, fighting the drug trade through the cartels and criminals that conduct it. The drugs, yes, fentanyl, opioids, but onwards to heroin, cocaine, and more. They're killing Canadian kids big time, as well as ones south of the border. But Donald Trump has been in the lead on that, and can and should claim a big win when those commitments from Kananaskis come out. Third, defense spending. We all agree that will hit 2% of our GDP in defense spending. And if I were writing the communique, Peter can correct me, and move as quickly as possible toward 5% with no timetable for actually getting there. Thirdly, controlling artificial intelligence and the internet to take down child pornography, which kills kids and harms many others too. Donald Trump and Melania just did it in the States, right? Take it down. We all want to move in that direction, so let's do it together at Kananaskis. Fifth, clamping down on illegal migration as the first part by criminals who kill innocent citizens in G7 countries. But of course, Mark Carney wants us to add, while supporting legal immigration into our country, because these are the people we really need for so many reasons, including, of course, to boost the productivity that we all want. And finally, it's a longer list, but I'll end here. Confronting China with a comprehensive strategy, security, the economy, prosperity. We shall not allow China to dump steel into our markets is an economic one, or to squeeze a democratic Taiwan, or actually produce the fentanyl at source in the social domain. So I see a lot of relatively easy wins at 6, 7, or 8, depending on how you count, from Charleroi. But what about, and I'll end on this point, the unpredictable Donald Trump? From the beginning, I was confident he would come to Kananaskis. Every G7 leader has always come to every G7 summit in the past half century. So they know it's the place to be. Donald Trump came to every one during his first presidency. This is his first outing on the big world stage. He just loves to be the center of attention, and he's guaranteed to be that, right, at Kananaskis. And over to Chris, would I end this final thought? 2 years from now, Donald Trump gets to host for the first and last time in his life an in-person summit in the USA at a golf course of his choice, I predict, in Florida, all right, with a lot of gold there. So I don't think Donald Trump is going to kill at Kananaskis the egg that will lay the golden goose for his greatest G7 summit in world history 2 years from now. Right, Chris?
Well, what a lead-in. Oh, my gosh. And here we are right between one prime minister and another on the program. There are very big expectations. I'm feeling a little intimidated. And also, I saw something the other day based on Amazon data. They were talking about the number of people who don't actually finish a long book. And that gives me hope because I'm the last chapter in this Kananaskis book. And, depending on how the next couple of days go, I might just urge all of you to forget reading my little article. But what I tried to do in the article is make a case not to all of you or to John or to Peter, but to Donald Trump and the people in the new U.S. administration that the G7 could be an opportunity for American leadership. And I believe that because when you look at the agenda and you've heard about some of the issues, and then you transpose it to what Donald Trump has been calling us to think about, there is a lot of alignment. Energy, whether you call it energy dominance or just the need for energy given the rise of AI, the needs of electric vehicles, even autonomous vehicles, we need energy pragmatism around the world, and that means not turning our nose up at nuclear, finding ways to create the energy that we'll need for our future economy. This is a community, the G7, that shares that concern and has the technology to try to take us forward. Talk about critical minerals, which John mentioned. Canada has them. A lot of countries have them. In the first Trump administration, Justin Trudeau raised the idea of, could we work together to develop our critical minerals economy? And we launched the Canada-U.S. Joint Action Plan for Critical Minerals Development. Donald Trump comes back into office, and there's been a lot of progress, but not a lot of progress pulling things out of the ground and getting them processed. And in the situation we're in, John mentioned the deficits, it's very unlikely that the cost of critical minerals development, processing, and marketing is going to be financed by governments. It's going to have to be financed by the private sector. And in that, we're going to have to create the conditions of stability that give investors the confidence they'll get their money back. And stability is, I think, one of the things that this G7 summit could powerfully contribute to. I'll come back to that in the end. Next up, migration. Whether you're watching what's going on in Los Angeles or anywhere else, the migration debate has changed. It's changed in part. The United Nations High Commission on Refugees reports because we have 122, give or take, million stateless and displaced people around the world. And as much as we watch the conflicts far away, whether it's Venezuela, Haiti, the situation in Ukraine, Syria, and the list goes on, we know where these people are coming from, but where they're going are to the economies they believe that could give them a chance to start over. The Prime Minister in the first session told us people like to come to Canada, and that's absolutely true. They like to come to the United States. They like to go to Australia, to Britain, to other parts of Europe. We've all of the G7s have been grappling with this to a greater or lesser extent. How do we handle it? Canada has been a pro-immigration country really from the beginning, but it's so much easier to assimilate people with advanced degrees who come with some money in their pocket because they can fit in really well. What we have to, all of us, recognize is that refugees and displaced people come and need help, and they need us to invest in their success. And that is a different burden. It's changed the politics of migration in all of our countries, and it puts a moral obligation on us to either let them in and help them, or to not give them that hope and let them stay home, or find a new home that's not here. I think we know which side of that equation we'd all like to be on, but it starts with a frank recognition that it is a tough problem. We talk about sanctions. So much of the global economy is tied in sanctions knots. Sanctions against the Iranians, against the Russians, against the Chinese. Now we've added tariffs. Tariffs, which are like sanctions, thrown out by the United States to be punishing one of the other global economies. For whatever, trade imbalance, bad hair day, what have you. We have a lot of them. But it's, again, undermining the stability and predictability of the global economy. And we need to find ways to stabilize it. That goes back to tariffs. The president is very focused on his tariffs, but having got our attention, the question that Canada asks us is, what do you want us to do with that attention? And I think there's a lot of credit that is deserved for Mark Carney in inviting Claudia Sheinbaum, the Mexican president, to be part of the second day of meetings. Canada was due to have a North American Leaders Summit in 23 or 24, and now it's still got the baton or the gavel if it wants. The opportunity for a sidebar and to say, let's have a piece of North America in the trade wars. One in which Canada, the US, and Mexico agree to put tariffs to one side, not necessarily get rid of them, put them to one side, and focus on improving the USMCA to being the kind of agreement that addresses some of the concerns that Donald Trump has raised, but also promotes trade and prosperity and creates some stability for the next couple of years so that business can prosper. When you look across this wide range of issues, I have to give Donald Trump credit. He has our attention. He has set a global agenda. What he now has to do, and I know he doesn't want me telling him what to do, but what he now has to do is convert having our attention to American leadership. And it was interesting, I was doing a briefing the other day in the White House, so it was a really big deal for me. I wore a better tie than this one, got a haircut before. I got a bunch of questions like, what's your worldview? I don't know. Well, do you believe what we're doing in Ukraine is right? What do you think about our tariff strategy? I don't know. I guess I'm a Simpsonite. I said, Simpsonite? And no, I wasn't talking about Jeffrey. I was talking about Homer. And I said, I think Homer once observed about beer what I would observe about the United States, which is that we're the source of and the answer to all of life's problems. And I think that's the great compliment that the G7's continued existence, and the G20s for that matter, gives to the United States. A look to leadership. And we share a broad agenda. We've heard about it this morning, but we also share a commitment to fix it. And I'll say this just as a ordinary American, and I know I love Canada, but so I'm biased, but how did we ever deserve you as a neighbor? And I say that because even if my own next door neighbor at my house was attacking me, throwing things at me, calling names, talking about taking over my house, I might not want to talk to him at all. And yet what we see from Mark Carney, what we saw from Justin Trudeau, to be fair, what we see from the G7 is a willingness to talk, not a willingness to turn your backs on the United States. We are less unipolar, I guess, preeminent than we were at the end of the Cold War. We need friends. Donald Trump says, we don't need Canadian cars, we don't need Canadian energy. He's wrong. But more important than those imports, what we need is cooperation. Nothing will get done unless we work on these problems together. And that's the opportunity in front of Donald Trump. He's been here before, but this is his opportunity. And if he comes through Kananaskis leading, the next couple of years will be good. If he walks away from Kananaskis like he walked away from Charlevoix, I think I'll sell all my stocks, plan to retire tomorrow because we're all doomed.
Peter, John, any response to or additions?
Is this where we get into always look on the bright side of life? Well, just a few thoughts. I think and I congratulate my colleagues for their contributions. Having Mexico come is a pretty big deal. I had the honor of representing Canada at the inauguration of Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. It worked out that it was the day of national truth and reconciliation, and there was a confidence vote in the House of Commons, so it was a who you going to call situation. But she and I sat down and we had a really, really interesting talk. And for Mexico, the issues with the United States are somewhat different than ours, but it is a triangular relationship. And that isosceles triangle, the short side, is what is the Canada-Mexico relationship. And that's something we need to work on. Mexicans are pretty sensitive to comments about, oh, well, we'll just go it alone and let's throw Mexico under the bus, that sort of thing. Mexico is our third largest merchandise trade partner, and energy companies in this province have over $6 billion invested in Mexico, including in the grid. So that's a big deal, and I think some of the other countries as well. John mentioned the crosswalk between the G7 and the G20. President Ramaphosa was also at Charlevoix. He had been newly elected, and he was there. And I think having that bridge is important, even though the G20 is a different animal. That's where you get the set piece speeches and a lot of bilateral meetings too. It's not nearly as informal as the G7, but that link to the global South and to other major countries has to be established, and it has to be maintained, and it hasn't always been. The last point I'd like to make is there are a lot of engagement groups as well that meet, have become part of this G7 industry, as it were. There's the Business 7, there's the Youth 7, there's the Labor 7, there's the University 7 Plus, which is an interesting new addition, and the Women's 7, and so on. And these have all filtered through recommendations as well that go into the process and can influence the discussion amongst leaders. So it's a very valuable instrument. It remains an informal international organization. There's no secretariat. There's no permanent civil service that supports the G7, and it's pretty loose and fluid. And I think that's why it's also effective.
First, the University Plus 7. Those of us at the University of Toronto are just thrilled to have welcomed the University of Calgary to the University 7 Plus family, and look forward to doing great things together. I have a question for both of my friends who have probably spent more time in the USA and Washington, D.C. Than I. If you were Mark Carney, how would you start the sessions at 7 of the Charlevoix Summit? Peter, I think you and Justin said you'd start with getting Donald Trump as the lead-off speaker, talk about the economy, about your budget. Would you do that again? Or Chris, would you pick something else that is even closer to the president's heart?
Want me to start? Okay, so there is a little bit of choreography that's built in, and there is a tradition in the G7 that the first discussion is on the global economy. Whether this will happen at Kananaskis, I don't know. The host leader, introduces the subject, makes a few points, and then always turns inevitably to the President of the United States to kick it off. So when I was at the Isushima Summit, which was Justin Trudeau's first one in Japan, that's exactly what the late Shinzo Abe did. Pitched it to Barack Obama, and President Obama led off, and then the others chimed in. We did the same thing at Charlevoix. President Trump had just put through a tax cut, and we thought, why not ask him to explain the tax cut, how he saw that in terms of what it was for the United States and its contribution to the global economy. And he agreed to do that. It was a great start. But then as sometimes things can happen, so you have a number of, shall we say, very engaged leaders who are veterans around the table. Think Angela Merkel, who's no longer there, Emmanuel Macron, who is now the dean, and they got into the weeds pretty fast on fiscal management, on downside risks, and a lot of this very detailed economic discussion. And President Trump lost some interest. So that's why I said earlier, his focus tends to be on these one-on-one meetings where you can work out a deal. And if you've read The Art of the Deal, that's exactly it. You set out positions. Sometimes they might be outrageous. You climb back. You try again. So that tends to be more his favorite style rather than having an in-depth discussion that maybe some of us here would really appreciate, but not necessarily all the leaders. Chris?
I think that one of the things that the United States needs to learn and Donald Trump needs to learn is how to take yes for an answer. You know, he has done a remarkable job of identifying some real problems that we face globally, things that he thinks are very important. And I think the leaders will come and agree, yes, we have to deal with the global economy and trade imbalances, and China as a country that claims to be a developing country and therefore doesn't accept all the WTO disciplines. If you do get to my boring chapter at the end of this book, you'll find that I'm kind of optimistic. My wife says very annoyingly optimistic, but maybe we even kick off a Trump round of the WTO since the Doha round failed and we haven't had a round in almost 20 years. Can we get back to that multilateral table? Can we come together? And I think that Donald Trump has really got most of these leaders looking to find ways to work together. And that's a little bit different than it was at Charlevoix, where he was new on the scene and his team was that much less effective at getting things done. He now has a team, you could say they're loyalists, but they're people that are pulling in the same direction. He's trying to move forward on a number of issues. But his theme so far has been overwhelmingly, this is wrong and we're not ready. And he's challenged the country to do more, to do better, to have that sense of emergency and urgency, which in a kinder, gentler way, we hear from Mark Carney as well. He understands that this is a critical moment. We need to move forward quickly. So that, I think, sets the table very well. But there's another thing which I should point out. And John mentioned that in 2026, the U.S. is hosting the G20, but in 2027, we're hosting the G7. So this theme of American leadership will come back. But also in 2026, we have midterm elections. You might have guessed that because we always have elections in the United States. And I think a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump and Republicans did so because they were unhappy with the Biden election, or the Biden presidency in terms of economic outcomes. And it was James Carville who told us it's always about the economy. I won't say stupid, but you're all not stupid, but the economy really matters. And Donald Trump will come to this summit, maybe not with a big, beautiful bill passed, with progress. He'll come with a sense of urgency. And I think if he has the wit to realize that no one here is trying to stop him from restoring a great economy and getting things going, and that actually he's being offered the chance to cooperate with a number of the most powerful countries in the world with some of the most sophisticated civil services and capacities to address problems, it's a huge opportunity. And if he seizes it, great. And if he doesn't, as I say, we're doomed.
I have a question. If we're into questions now, or unless anybody else has anything else they'd like to add. John, all the initiatives or whatever may be agreed upon cost money, and based on Prime Minister Chrétien, I mean, who pays for these? Like an example, wildfires. So you've got a multilateral agreement with all these countries. Who pays for what? I mean, because there's a cost to all of that, right? Any simple answer? No.
I think every Canadian, from Littlewood to Jasper, would want their federal government, Mark Carney, to spend a little more money, I would say ideally, on the Canadian Armed Forces, so they would have heavy, not just strategic lift, but heavy water bombers to send to whatever province or community need them. But if we could instantly get those right next door in the USA, because they already have a federal firefighting force, we don't, right? So they could fly up here within a few hours without costing the Canadian taxpayer a dime, right? Through this new arrangement, which in my mind, it would be a G7 firefighting force. This would involve, and I don't think you need the permission of the provinces to do it, just buying heavy lift water bombers from, let's say, the Boeings or whatever of this world. It would be part of the defense budget. We could claim it as part of our NATO obligations, and it would be a very good thing. If you all put in a little money at 7 or 8, and typically, Peter knows the arithmetic, Canada puts in a dime, the Americans put in $1, right? It's the greatest financial multiplier, and we saw that, of course, Peter mentioned Stephen Harper, Muskoka, maternal newborn, and child health. $5 billion raised on the spot for the poorest mums and babies in the world. Then a few months later, Stephen took it to the UN and ramped it up to $40 billion, right? So that's part of the magic of the G7 leaders when they're alone together and know it's only up to them to do the right thing.
Let me add just one point. We build the water bombers in Canada. The water bombers that are used in California are built in Canada. So there is that particular angle. But in terms of leveraging funds at Charlevoix, we had one initiative where we hoped to raise $400 million to facilitate the education of women and girls in conflict zones. We decided, Prime Minister Trudeau and I, we were going to be in touch with the World Bank. I went down, we did that. We ended up with $3.2 billion for that particular initiative. So it can be done if the consensus is there and the creativity is there. Wildfires, unfortunately, are not going to go away. It's an aspect of climate change. And there's a way to work across. We also had South African firefighters who were here in Canada in the last season. So this does not have to be G7 specific. It can be mandated through international bodies. It can also be partially financed creatively through the World Bank and through other organisms as well, if we're smart enough to do it.
Just to add, I mean, one of the things there are a lot of things that Donald Trump says that we take with a grain of salt, but one of the things he feels is that somehow the U.S. is subsidizing Canada. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about John Manley, who was here earlier, and his famous comment about defense spending, that you can't sit and enjoy the meal at the NATO table and then get up and go to the washroom when the bill comes due. But on issues other than defense, Canada's always stepped up, and these are good examples. One of the things we're going to do this year, after this summit and before the next, is open the Gordie Howe International Crossing. And as some of you will know, if you followed some of the accounting, it started out as a joint project, but it's now easily 80% financed by Canada. Who's subsidizing who? And I think this is where Canada doesn't always beat the drum, doesn't demand credit, but Canada should get more credit. And if we work systematically and we cite examples like these, I think Canada more than pulls its weight. It does a really good job. There are a lot of things we still have to work on, but accepting and respecting what Canada can do will make this summit much more successful. And it's really easy to say, oh, you don't measure up over television and letting the comment come out in a tweet. Eye to eye, person to person, as we saw with Mark Carney and President Trump in the Oval Office, the tone changes, and it can be much more constructive.
Helps if you have accurate numbers.
That's true.
And a trade deficit is not a subsidy, but I digress.
Also true.
Thank you. I have a question here, and it is directed to John, and I think it's a bit of a plant, but it's very appropriate. John, how do we measure success of the action plan that would be included as part of a communique? Are there any performance assessments?
There are indeed. You do need communiques, and I think I would project that at Kananaskis. We'll have maybe 6 subject-specific ones, including one on wildfires, if all goes well. And then, of course, the chair's statement, as Peter predicted, of how robust a sort we'll have to see. Then they have to contain commitments. We shall, we will, we agree to. Not just, oh, there's this problem out there and somebody should do something about that. They should be strong, not just, we'll continue to do what we reaffirm, right? But we'll do more for Ukraine, right? So they have to be ambitious, and ideally ambitious enough to solve the problem within the next year, to the extent that it can be solved within the next year. Because a year later, they all get together and have a chance to recommit again. But the final point, we're all used to politicians making promises, and they don't always keep them. Speech from the throne, King's Speech, State of the Union address. Do they do any better when they all get together at the Sunny Summit peak? Thanks to the great work of the hundreds of students each year who beaver away around the clock, we know in the G7 research group, we're the self-appointed global governance auditor generals. Last year at Apulia, about a year ago, they made 456 commitments. Pretty good. We identified them, picked the priority ones, and the returns are just about to come in. How well did they keep those promises? 92%, A+. And during the first half of the year, the compliance period, well, that was Joe Biden. But during the second half, it was Donald Trump. So with Donald Trump, some would say, even with Donald Trump as president of the United States, you've got the whole G7, and he wasn't at Apulia to make the commitments, all right, at 92%. So I trust the G7 to keep the promises, to make them, but we need to help them through the engagement groups and other ways like conferences here to have them make better commitments in the first place.
You've just seen why John Kirton is such a beloved professor. 92%, you get an A+? Easy grader, let me tell you.
Okay, I think we're at the end of our time. I want to thank our panelists. I think it was a salient and relevant discussion with a lot of depth and sharing of experience. So thank you, Peter, John, Chris.